Okay, Pam, I think we can get started. Most folks have voted, and just to give you the quick results, I'm not sure if I know how to show them. 15% said that they're concerned about a robot apocalypse. 31% said that bots that spy on me and listen to my secrets. 31% said data scientists reading the story of my life, and 62% said predictive models that label me something I'm not, and 8% the remainder.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Ironside Take 30 with the data scientist. It's just kind of a lighthearted approach to ethics and AI, which can be a pretty heavy topic. That's what we'll be talking about today. It's a very broad topic, and so I've just selected 3 of the most common ethical concerns surrounding AI to talk about. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out the agenda of some upcoming Take 30s with the data scientist. Next week, we'll be partnering with my counterpart in the advisory practice to talk about AI use cases, how to define them, prioritize them, validate them, etc. I'd also recommend that you join tomorrow the Take 30 with the data advisor, and every Thursday we have Take 30 with the BI expert. This is me, your presenter today. I'm the director of the data science practice at Ironside. Don't have to read my whole profile. I'm just going to move through that. We like to start just quickly telling you about Ironside. We're here to help our clients make better decisions for their business using data, and that's really our mission statement. So we like to always start with that. And we do that using a very holistic approach. We have capabilities across everything data and analytics, from our advisory practice that helps build strategies to designing and building warehouses, visualizations, or AI applications, deployment, government, and management. So we can help across all of those capabilities. So into the meat of today, I said I'm just going to pick 3 of the most common ethical issues that are talked about. Biased machine learning, when good AI goes bad, and then data privacy we'll talk about, probably the most common. So I'm not usually a comic person, but I thought this was cute and demonstrates a very important point a little bit. So if you think about a robot apocalypse, right, and using machine learning to train models, or to train robots in this case, if you gave them the historical data set of all wars that had ever been fought throughout the history of mankind, a machine learning algorithm is probably going to pick up on the fact that the vast majority of those wars were won with weapons like spears and rocks, right? Not lasers and missiles and other more advanced technology. And so in this case, that led to the robot's demise pretty quickly. That obviously oversimplifies machine learning and what it is, but it demonstrates the point how important that historical data is. Now with machine learning, the purpose of it is really to make history repeat itself, right? You're using this historical data set to find patterns and to replicate those. Now sometimes you want to avoid the predicted outcome, sometimes you want to know it and use it, but for the machine, its goal is to replicate history perfectly. That would make it a perfectly accurate model. We as humans have, not the best history sometimes, right? We have patterns and behaviors in our historical data sets that we don't want to repeat or that we shouldn't want to repeat. And if you're familiar with the phrase garbage in, garbage out, right? Think of it that way. If you put biased human behavior into a machine learning algorithm, you're going to get biased human behavior out. And so when you think about all the media around biased machine learning algorithms in HR or loan default models or in criminal investigations, we'll talk about that a little bit. It's easy to think about, why would we do that? Why would we build a biased model? But you have to understand the activities that have to take place to weed all of that out, right? So data scientists and the people designing it, right, have biases. They're human. But even if you pull that aside, the historical data is so riddled with that. And so you have to take this very active approach to weeding that out, and you have to take an iterative approach to testing it. Some corporations even hire people to find the bias in a model that's already been built and trained to allow them to then understand where the bias is, go back and correct it, and again, it becomes an iterative process. So it seems obvious, take gender and race out of models, so it's not looking for that and using it, but there are proxies for these things. And if there's one thing a machine learning algorithm is good at, it's digging into data to find complex relationships that are not very obvious to a human eye. And so it can find those proxies and those subtleties that we may not be aware of right away. So one quick example of this, thinking about HR analytics. This is an area where they're very aware of this issue, very on top of it. There's techniques and methods in place to do their best to limit bias in machine learning algorithms. But let's put that aside for a second and pretend that we don't know this issue, and our first priority is to build machine learning algorithm that would generate a short list of candidates for some high-level executive position. So let's say that this is your historical data set, right? What could you expect to get out of that is the exact same outcome, right? How do you, as an organization that has maybe goals for diversity and inclusivity, how do you force that into a model that doesn't know it exists? It's not in its world, it's not in its historical data set, right? How do you teach it that the attributes that make someone a good executive that are in the data set right now may only apply to a certain population, and there are other subpopulations that are not represented. And the attributes that make them good, good leaders and good executives aren't going to be in there, and the machine's going to have trouble picking that up and learning that. These things like multitasker, self-motivated, empathic, I'm just making all that up. So those are just examples of things that could be true for one group that are underrepresented in this particular data set. So that's an example of how we end up with these biased models and how easy it is to do that. Now there's techniques and methods, like I said, to oversample, to kind of force a biased model in favor of the goals that you have for diversity and inclusivity. And like I said, there's techniques to make it very iterative, to build the model, find the bias, correct the bias, find the bias, correct the bias, etc. But the point is that you have to make that an active approach. Just building machine learning and putting it out there is passive and irresponsible, especially in cases like HR analytics, loan default, underwriting, anywhere where it's going to directly impact human, right? So we have to think about the cost of those false positives and false negatives. So the second issue I wanted to address is when good AI goes bad. You may have heard the term AI for good that's trending. A lot of large corporations and political entities are talking about this and having conventions to talk about AI for good. And that is the idea that we could use AI to solve some of our biggest problems in society: corruption, poverty, crime, hunger. And that has very, very good intentions, right? And that's why a lot of people are talking about it. But another term that is trending comes from the critique of those groups called technological solutionism. And this is the false assumption that because AI works on very narrow use cases, and that's what AI is best at, it's a narrow business use case or a narrow application, this false assumption that because it works for that you could use it for these much more complex, broad topics and issues that we're trying to solve for. So where that can go bad, again, it goes back to what is the cost of a false positive? What is the direct impact on humans? The best and easiest way to understand this is the example of facial recognition on police body cams, right? The cost of misclassifying an individual as a criminal in the heat of a moment in an interaction. Obviously that could potentially be deadly or very serious. At the very least, the cost that miscalculation is, if you imagine being misclassified as a criminal, right? There's a lot of social consequences that go on along with that. Misclassification of medical diagnoses. Facial recognition has been used, I think, in the UK. There was an example of measuring children's attentiveness in school and using that to identify behavioral or attention disorders and recommending them for other classes and coursework. And part of the issue is one, that labeling and where you could misclassify someone, but also, again, that the underlying root issues that AI is not going to pick up and understand, but that some children may learn in different ways, right? And so there are consequences and side effects of these very good, well-intended applications that we have to be aware of. So technological solutionism is more of a global issue and a global discussion that's happening. How do we leverage something like AI that could be very beneficial to society without actually causing our demise through it, right? And creating robots that want to destroy us for our own good is the ultimate example there. Now, the last issue to talk about is data privacy, probably the number one most talked about issue with ethics, and that's because it involves all of us, whether we're data scientists or a business who uses AI or not. Everyone is touched by AI. Everyone has data out there unless you're completely off the grid, right? And so when it comes to data privacy and protecting that, I see three levels of responsibility ultimately that we can talk about. One is the individual. So every individual has data. Data's out there, and we have to make the decision to decide who to share that data with and what data to share, right? The more personal it is, the more serious it is, and that's why we have things like HIPAA to protect and put some guidelines around that so that we can have some trust and some faith that we can share that data and get the benefits of it, right? So everybody's asked to opt into things like electronic medical records or cookies on your computer, or everyone soon is going to have to decide whether they want to opt in to contact tracing. So we have to think about the pros and cons of that and make that decision for ourselves. So that's kind of our responsibility for our own data, is to be informed. And so that's not exactly black and white. Data users and their responsibility, I think this is the most black and white. There's very clear regulations. When you're a data user and you have access to data, it's very clear what you should and shouldn't do. Restrictions, regulations, standard procedures to protect other people's data, right? So that example of data scientists sitting there looking at the story of someone's life. I have family and friends who will say this, well, I don't want them or Big Brother knowing what I'm doing. And sometimes I explain, well, I'm them, I suppose, as a data scientist, and I'm not sitting there popping popcorn and like reading your story, like, oh wow, look what he did, and he bought what? So, so I try to reassure people that that's not really what's happening. That's not how data is read, as we all know, and it's not intended for that purpose. At the same time, I have to also keep in mind there are people with malicious intents, and that's why we have these restrictions, and that's why things are very black and white for data users. Another gray area, though, is organizations. And organizations have a responsibility, a very serious responsibility of deciding how they're going to use their data and the data of their consumers and patients and customers. As a data user myself, data scientist, it's my responsibility to do my best to limit bias in a machine learning algorithm that I build. But my client, the organization, it's their responsibility to really decide what use cases they're going to move forward with and where they draw the line in the sand. I had one client who really took a lot of efforts to talk internally about how they'd want to use their data. They had access to their customers' data, where they went, what they bought, when they went to the gym, throughout the day. And they understood the seriousness of that privacy of the data. And so as we talked about AI use cases, they would say, okay, this one's hitting on our creepy factor. They said, we call it that, but this is where we draw the line. And we decided on this very early in AI maturity. That's where we're going to draw the line. And that's fantastic. And I would highly recommend any organization to have those conversations and decide where you're going to draw that line. Because it gets complicated, right? Because you start talking about all these AI use cases and what you can do. And it's really up to organizations to decide to be very responsible with that data and decide what level of privacy and intrusiveness into someone's life that they're going to go with that. So just some final steps here about how we can all take steps to be ethical and have ethical AI. A few things I haven't really talked about is explainability in AI and transparency. That's another topic that is discussed a lot and is going to be very important. You can't, as a bank loan officer, say, you know, I'm not going to give you a loan, it's been rejected. And when the customer says, well, why? You know, I'm not aware of any issue that would prohibit me from having a loan. You can't, as the loan officer, say, I don't know, because my AI told me, you know, not to give you any money, right? You have to have reasons and you have to support it. And again, these types of AI applications that are very closely connected with humans and affect their daily lives, you have to have transparency into that model and be able to explain to them what's happening. So that's a big trending topic as more and more restrictions come around AI. Transparency is going to be one of those regulations and demands. Augmented intelligence is another one. The issue of replacing workers is another ethical, social dilemma that people are concerned about. If we automate everything, you know, what happens with the workforce and how do you get paid for your time when your time is now a fraction of what it used to be because of AI? Augmented intelligence is the concept of giving someone additional information to allow them to do their job, right? So instead of replacing a loan officer by automatically saying, you know, no, we're not going to give you a loan, instead it gives the loan officer information and gives them all that transparency about why this person's predicted, you know, 87% likely to default on their loan. Why is that? So that you can have a conversation, so that you can be smarter, make better decisions for your business, but do so in a way that's good for your customer, that's transparent and ethical. Take responsibility. Those are everything I just said before. Take responsibility for yourself. Be careful with your data. Take responsibility as a data user. And as an organization who is going to embark in any AI application, be aware of all these issues. Educate yourself. Have constant conversations. And that's this last one. Keep conversations going. Make sure that you're engaging internally, make sure that you're educated on all the issues that are happening, because more and more information is going to come out and more regulations will come about, I would predict. And the organizations responsible for making sure that they use their data in a way that helps their customers, their business, and doesn't, you know, cause any harm. So with that, and yet another comment to lighten up the topic of ethics, I'm going to move on to the question and answers. And as I'm waiting for questions to come in, Debbie can put up another poll about some topics that you might be interested in hearing about in upcoming Take30 sessions. I also have down there an email address if you have other topics that you'd like to send us that aren't on that list. So why don't we go ahead and open up the poll and open it up for any questions that anyone has. If everyone's you know, filling out your poll and thinking about other topics or questions that you have now for around ethics and AI. If you have further questions too, you know, we're always welcome to schedule one-on-one and, you know, talk offline or send a question too. But
so Pam, on the poll, 63% said they would like a discussion on AI platforms and tools, and 50% said, I don't know how that would work since that's more than 100, but how to build an AI strategy for your organization. They were by far, because we could select more than one, by far the two largest. But there was interest in Machine Learning 101 and steps to becoming a data scientist as well. Pam, one of the questions is, how do you feel about black box solutions? Are they a bad idea since they may not allow for full transparency?
Black box solutions and black box algorithms refer to closed-off solutions where you get the prediction out of it, but no insight into why that prediction was presented, or what are the relationships and correlations in the model. Sometimes there are turnkey solutions where you can purchase it for a very specific use case. Sometimes there are algorithms that are just very black box neural net models, for example, are very difficult to understand and tease apart. They're not necessarily a bad idea. They have a place. I think it's important, again, going back to responsibility, to understand when to use it, and again, what is the cost of a false positive and a misclassification. Are you sitting in front of a customer and you need to explain to them why their insurance premium just went up, or why you're not going to give a loan default model, for example, or not going to give them a loan because of a default model, versus something that's an automatic process that just predicts, a machine needs repair, for example, where you can go in and check it. Oh, no, it really doesn't. We understand what happened with the model. So when it comes to black box solutions, I would just refer to the use case. What's the consequence? What do you need to do? What's the insight that needs to come out of it? Sometimes they're very useful, and there's no serious problem with not having that transparency. So again, it just comes back to being responsible and thinking it through.
Hey, Pam, it's Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, thanks for this. I have a question for you about HR analytics. Recently, I've seen a great deal about it, and we've been looking into that a bit ourselves. And this discussion you've had really brings up the question of how sensitive bias must be in HR analytics. Are you aware of any particular techniques they use or processes they follow to keep bias out of HR analytics in particular?
Yeah, I think there's several techniques you can do. Again, one is trying to remove bias that you're aware of and that you can find. One is trying to flip it so that you're actually building a biased model in favor of the goals that you want, in favor of finding minorities and women, for example, in a male-dominant field. And so you kind of boost the odds in their favor. One of those is that iterative process of building a model, maybe even hiring a group of people to find the bias for you before you go live with it, and then go back and remove it and iterate. So I've heard of, I think Google and Amazon might do things like that, especially after I believe it was Amazon's model that came out that was biased against women. And so now they go through a deeper process.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Pam, it doesn't look like we have any other questions at this time.
Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. Hope to see everyone next week. And feel free to reach out if you have other topics you want to hear about, or specific questions that we didn't get to answer today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.